now we have our list of the disciples. Listen to this list. It's a good list. A little review from over here. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, son of whatever his name is. No, I'm just teasing. Alphaeus and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And I want to talk a little bit in general about this list. This list occurs 4 times in the New Testament. This list of the 12 disciples. In Matthew 10 here, Mark 3, Luke 6, Acts chapter 1. And every time this group of 12 breaks down into sort of 3 subgroups of 4. There's like this one big team of 12, and then there's little smaller teams in there that Jesus is working with. And the first 4 guys are kind of the main team. They're the team that Jesus spends the most time with. They're the 4 guys we know the most about. They're kind of the core 4 for Jesus. That's what I'm calling them. And this morning what I want to do is just the little bit of time we have left is just, instead of talking about all 12 of these guys, I want to talk about the core 4. And I'm going to sort of paint a picture of who these guys were. And I want you to think about this. Which of these 4 do I most relate with? Which of these 4 guys is most like me? Do I sort of kind of have the same personality or gifting or kind of temperament? Which of these 4 guys that connects most with me? And to help you with that, I've given each of the guys a color, and I've given each of the guys an animal, sort of a little personality test, sort of fun time with the 12 disciples. So see what color you are, see what animal you are. You can talk about it as a family when you leave here, because I know you love to talk about my sermons after. All right. First on the list is Peter. Actually, it's Simon who is called Peter, and Peter means rock or chief. He's the leader. He's the guy who's always out front. He's first in every single list. This is Peter. Peter's the impulsive one of the group. He's spontaneous. He's the one who is emotional and out there. He's the one who speaks and acts before he thinks. One commentator I read this week said, if the disciples were put into a lineup and you were trying to identify Peter, you could always tell which one he is because he'd be the one with the foot-shaped mouth, right? He's always just sort of putting his foot in his mouth and jumping in. Peter has high highs and low lows. He goes from Jesus telling him, Peter, you are the rock upon which I'm going to build my church. Peter, you're going to be instrumental. You're going to be foundational to the kingdom movement that I've started moving forward. That's you. Imagine if Jesus said that to you. You're going to be like my main guy. How good would you feel? So Peter gets that huge compliment. But he also has Jesus say to him, get back from me, Satan. Wow, that's a big swing. You're the foundation. You're Satan. When Jesus calls you Satan, it's kind of a bummer. I'm just guessing. But those are both statements that Jesus makes to Peter. So he's got these high highs and these low lows, mountaintop to valley. Peter is the guy who jumps out of the boat to walk on the water towards Jesus. He's the one who, when Jesus asks, who do you guys think that I am? He just kind of blurts out, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, the soldiers come to arrest Jesus, and Peter just gets all worked up, and he's like, you're not taking my boy, and he pulls out his sword, and he cuts off the ear of one of the soldiers. And Jesus has to say, whoa, 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 emotional, spontaneous, kind of erratic guy, calm it down. We're not going to go about it that way. And he, puts the ear back on, which would have been pretty cool, right? Peter is the guy who passionately and fervently declares to Jesus, I will never deny you, Lord. And then turns around and not only denies him once, but 3 times. Peter is a yellow. He's an otter, kind of the fun, spontaneous, impulsive guy. And I'm not sure if this is going to give you a lot of confidence or not, but Peter is probably the disciple I relate with most. And what's funny about it is it's not just me, but I think my wife is kind of a Peter person. She's a little Peter, yellow, otter in her too. So the 2 of us together are spontaneous, impulsive, non-planning team. Let me give you an example of this. We're just recently at my brother's house on our little family trip. We'd never been there before. It's a new place where he's moved. One evening, there's 6 kids under 6 in the house, and my mom was like, you guys should take a bike ride. And so we were like, yeah, we're out. Get away from the kids for a little bit. It was super fun. So we get out on the bikes, and we're cruising along my brother's new neighborhood, just checking out the houses and the places. He lives in Virginia. And about half an hour into the ride, I turned to Amy and I said, do you have any idea where we are? She's like, no. And then she says, you brought your cell phone, right? And I'm like, no, I actually didn't. And I'm like, do you remember my brother's street name or address? And she's like, I'm like, me neither. Oh, all right. Huh. Well, we were supposed to be home like 10 minutes ago, so what are we going to do now? So we literally, no lie, drove around for another hour just randomly trying to find something that looked familiar. And it's starting to get dark, and we're thinking, this is a disaster. Like, stop at 7-Eleven and be like, you know where my brother's house is? What street does he live on? What's his phone number? Luckily, we stumbled upon a landmark and got back, but that's sort of a little glimpse into the fun life of Dave and Amy Teixeira. A little bit like Peter. Next on the list is Andrew. And we get introduced to Andrew in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. He's actually a disciple of John the Baptist, but he hears about Jesus, and he goes and spends a day with Jesus, and he just listens and analyzes, and through sort of his listening and putting the pieces together, he determines that Jesus is the Messiah. And that's a great picture of Andrew. He's an analyzer, a thinker, a planner, someone who's able to research and put details together in order to figure out answers. I'm giving him the color blue. He's kind of a beaver, a detail-oriented guy. He's not a front man like his brother. Peter was sort of the one out front and kind of life of the party. Andrew's behind the scenes, organizing, taking care of the details, making sure things run smoothly. In fact, the very first thing Andrew does after discovering that Jesus is the Christ is, it says in John chapter 1, the first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. So, as much as PR and press as Peter gets in the Gospels, Andrew's the one who first introduced him to Jesus. He's the discoverer. Andrew is the picture of all those people who quietly labor in humble places. Andrew is the guy behind the scenes, making sure that things are completed and well done. Andrew is the person who makes the Peters look good in this world, right? Know any Andrews? Next on the list is James. James appears in the Bible as a little bit more of a silhouette. He's not quite a picture. You just get a couple glimpses of James, but the pictures you get are just real neat pictures, and you can tell who this guy is. First of all, he's always paired with his brother John. James and John, James and John, James and John. They're always together, and James is always first, which in the Bible means that he's sort of the leader or the personality of the pair. And Jesus gives this pair of guys a nickname, and their nickname is Sons of Thunder. He says, you guys are the sons of thunder. And it's sort of a title that refers to the zeal and passion and drive and boldness that James has. James is a red. He's a lion. He's a type A personality. He's a driver. He's a get-her-done kind of guy. And this will tell you a little something about James. When the church first starts, the authorities are trying to shut it down, trying to squelch this movement, this Christian movement. And so Herod Agrippa is actually trying to sort of shut things down, and he asks himself, who's the leader? Who's leading the charge? Who's causing the most trouble out there? Who do I need to sort of execute and make an example of? Who do you think he goes after? He goes after James. And James is actually beheaded because he's that kind of in-your-face, aggressive, fervent, explosive, passionate leader guy who's just always going. Remember how Peter denied Jesus after he said, I won't deny you, Lord? And Peter's kind of this way. James is the kind of personality that he would never deny Jesus. Just intense, bold, not scared of conflict, that sort of a personality. Finally on the list, last but not least, there's John. And I love John. He's interesting. Oh, you guys are laughing at this slide. John's a writer. He writes five, thank you. He writes the Gospel of John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. He also writes Revelation. So he's got a lot of his works published in this book, which is pretty good, really. And John he has this beautiful writing. When you read what he's written, it's just beautiful, and it's deep, deep theology, and it's wonderfully descriptive and poetic, and the explanations and the pictures he paints are wonderful. I'm going to read you just a couple examples from John's writing. And more than just the specifics of what he says, although that's great too, I just want you to sort of listen for who he is as you read his words here. I'm going to read from John, his gospel, chapter 1, right at the beginning, verse 1. This is a picture he paints of Jesus. Just listen to the sort of artistry and the depth and the descriptiveness of what he writes. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. And he goes on from there. Another little section that he writes in 1 John about love and God, just really beautiful and, again, descriptive, is he says this, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us." That's like some of the best writing in the history of the world right there. Good stuff. That's John. He's reflective. He's someone who thought and loved deeply. He's steady and balanced, and he's a very loyal person. I've given him the color green and the animal, the golden retriever, just sort of that loyal companion and friend. A couple of stories that stick out to me about John. In the Gospels, at the Last Supper, the night before Jesus is going to go to the cross, he's sharing this meal with his disciples. And they're reclined around the table. They're sort of laying there. And John leans up against Jesus, just sort of snuggles. Like John and Jesus sort of snuggled. But that's just sort of the tenderness of John. You get a picture of that. And then at the cross, picture this scene. The leader of your group is being crucified, executed by the religious authorities and the government. And all the disciples have fled. They've scattered. They're nowhere to be found. They're fleeing for their lives because they're afraid that they will sort of undergo the same fate as Jesus. There's only one disciple there at the cross. It's John. John's at the cross, the loyal, faithful, steady, constant companion. And he's there with his arm around Jesus' mother. And Jesus even addresses him from the cross. So just some pictures of who this John is. That's the core four. The core four guys. All real different. All called to be on the team with Jesus. And I guess the final thing I want to say about kingdom training, and it's a real basic point, but it's super important for you to understand this in a real personal way, and that's kingdom training is available to everyone. No matter who you are, no matter what your personality is or your gift mix, your bent on life, your gifts, abilities, God has a place for you on his team. He's got work for you to do. He invites you in, just as you are. You don't have to pretend to be someone else. You don't have to wish that you were a Peter or a John or a James. You just be you. And God says, I got a place for you. I can use your gifts. You can be a part of my kingdom kind of movement team.